as you unfold, your unfolding changes a planet. The whole of the planet is at different levels of initiation. All of those are part of a single planetary intelligence. First principles run through every stage of development. The people in power don't understand development, so they don't build deliberately developmental processes into culture. Western civilization suppressed access to the astral plane, the dream plane. And as you mature in your systems thinking, you're actually beginning to think in such a way that you deconstruct the solidity of your experience, because the mind understands that everything is actually interconnected. The AI is being coded from the level of mind that produces the problems that we're in the first place. What we're talking about with AI is the awakening of mineral intelligence. It's like the awakening of cosmic kundalini. The fourth turning is the integration of these contemplative technologies, the platform that allows the intelligence of the earth into the technology so that it can synchronically unfold evolution based on how things spontaneously unfold. This is how you change the planet. We've seen what an effect the kind of internet revolution and social media and this kind of technology has had. And, this is nothing compared to, what's about to unfold. So that's and I think we're all kind of aware of that. We're on the edge of our seats of like, what's going to happen? What deity are we going to invoke with AI? Like, who are we welcoming, right? Are we welcoming who the hell is coming? So that's the fourth industrial revolution. And you can think of that really as outer technology. Very, very sophisticated outer technology. Now, when we refer to the fourth turning of the Dharma, we're really using a Buddhist model, but it's a universal model. So the first turning of the Dharma in the Buddhist tradition, let's kind of universalize it. It really refers to practice related to understanding your own individual suffering. So this has got to do with our friends who are listening. You begin to realize that you are struggling, that you are suffering. And you begin to realize that there are causes of this suffering related to usually like childhood conditioning, multi-generational trauma. And you begin the process of cleaning up. And you begin the process of mindfulness practice and developing psychological reflection. And you begin your journey. But you're mainly motivated because you're limping and not having much fun, right? And then as you mature and you do your work, which can take some time or even lifetimes, as you clear that karma, that negative momentum, you begin to realize that there's a bigger game. And the second turning of the Dharma relates to the fact that in any path, any spiritual path, at a certain point on that journey, the aspirant, the soul, will begin to recognize that they are part of something larger. And so it isn't just about alleviating their own personal suffering, it's also about alleviating universal suffering. So this is where the Bodhisattva or the Christ or those kinds of archetypes about being concerned about the whole and realizing that nobody gets out of here alone. So that second turning is often called the great turning, the great wheel. But you see that in all the traditions, in every tradition. And even if you're not in a tradition, if you're motivated for the general well-being of everybody on this planet, you can say that you're in that second turning. And there's all kinds of practices related to opening up the heart-mind's experience of interconnectivity, of a unified field, of compassion, and of a kind of a resonant field where everything is interconnected, right? That's the second turning. And so there's all sorts of technologies, contemplative practices that help facilitate that. And then the third turning is, well, if you've kind of built a vessel of mindfulness and somatic awareness, that you're present to your own reactivity, and you've opened up a motivation to want to be of service for the whole, then the third turning was related to the, well, two things. First thing is particularly potent practices that speed up that process. So you can think of any sort of technical practice, because the first and second turnings aren't so technical. They're more psychological. Things like breath work, psychedelics, sexual yogas, all of the things that are actually techniques that often people get to in the beginning, but actually they're actually advanced techniques in the sense that they're done to speed up the process once the individual and the collective are kind of aligned. So the third turning referred to those kinds of special techniques, Kundalini yoga, Hatha yoga, right? The paradox in our culture is we've got all of this mixed up because we don't really have a curriculum, and we've kind of imported stuff from Asia, but it's a bit here and it's a bit there, and maybe a little bit from Native Americans or a little bit of whatever the Aboriginal. I mean, it's a bit of a smorgasbord. So that's kind of where we, and that's kind of where we are, in particularly in terms of Asian practices, and they kind of fall into those three camps. And you can also look in terms of Western practices as well. You know, practices related to individual trauma, practices related to developing compassion and a sense of interconnectivity, and then practices related to speeding up that process by uncovering the shadow or blasting through blockages, you know, that kind of stuff. So what do we mean by fourth turning? Well, there's a number of things here. First thing is, we could say the fourth turning is where all of the psychotechnologies of the East and the psychotechnologies of the West meet, right? So East and West are meeting, right? For the first time. I mean, the process has been happening over the last, 100 years, but the understanding of how we go about integrating these in a very deep way, that is more recent. So that's the first understanding, the fourth turning. The second understanding, the fourth turning, is then related to the nature of time, because time is the fourth dimension, so to speak. So by that, what we mean is well, what time is it? Like, and by time, I don't mean timeless time. I mean relative time. Like, how are we measuring how this is unfolding? Because whatever is unfolding unfolds in time. So if we don't know what time it is, so essentially understanding time is related to understanding our relationship with the planet, because it's the planet that is unfolding through time. And we're so disconnected to our mother, to this earth being, that we have no idea what the season is. I mean, yes, we do hear like, oh, we're in a changing of a cycle. Well, what does that mean when we change cycles? And when did that last happen? And so that whole question around that our process is not separate actually from a planetary process. So that planetary perspective, that is a new thing when it comes to the traditions. To recognize that the journey that we're making, that humanity, that you and I are part of a humanity that is actually has a function within the larger field of this earth being, and that all of the heavens and the hells and these altered states of dimensions and out of body experiences and all of this stuff is happening inside of the ecosystem of this planetary being. And this planetary being is something is happening. So part of that fourth turning is like recognizing that a lot synchronization is very important, because when we synchronize, you're synchronizing with that time. whatever that time is. So the other thing about what the fourth turning is about understanding the path that unfolds from the soul. So the traditions will talk about there being, well, depends on the tradition, but you can cut the cake, 7 slices or 12 slices or 5 slices. But if you cut the cake in 7 slices, the fourth slice, the middle slice of the planes of our planet is the soul, right? Now, just like the 7 chakras, the mid chakra is the heart. So there's a relationship between coming into the heart and maturing into soul consciousness. And as a doctor of psychology, soul consciousness is actually something quite precise. It's not a vague kind of term. It means something actual in terms of our development, in terms of our evolution. And so the soul functions through pure synchronicity. And synchronicity is related to time. So the fourth turning, right, is related to beginning to function from a different level of development, from a different energetic center, from a different way of learning how to do things. And because the soul is also a collective being, right? So, you have to have done your own individual work, so to speak, before you do that, because otherwise you're going to have conflicts with the collective. Because if you're not yet individuated, you're going to have issues with the collective, because you have to be paradoxically an individual in order to actually fully function within a collective without being swallowed. Yeah. So the fourth turning essentially, then it also has the degree of sophistication to meet the fourth turning of technology. Because just mindfulness is not going to mindfulness is not enough of a technology to turn the wheel, to really turn the wheel on an individual level, on a planetary level. When we talk about turning the wheel of suffering, we're talking about we're talking about a reversing time or a new time. So to have a new time, you need a new paradigm, so to speak, so that when this technology meets it, that our interiors are not completely taken over, because this technology is so potent. When it'd be very easy to lose our souls, right? To decondition, to be so conditioned so quickly by the dopamine, whatever's going to happen when this stuff rolls out. So that's what we mean by fourth turning, right? A new level upon which Dharma can be built. And by Dharma, I kind of mean like the lifelong learning. What does it look like to redesign? Part of it is redesigning. Part of it is actually synchronistic. The path for the nature of the time that we are in right now, because we're in a very particular time. And whilst the methodologies of the past are potent, they might not necessarily be the appropriate methodologies, right? So that's and then the last thing I'd say is the other piece of it is with the fourth turning is understanding that the psychological and the kind of biological and the cultural and the civilizational, those are 4 different perspectives on the situation, and they all need to be integrated in to that holonic perspective.
Inspired soul. Just taking a quick sec here to thank all of you that are subscribed to the channel. Everything you see around here at the Inspired Evolution is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. But it's not lost on me that the ability to have conversations with individuals like Dr. John here is completely supported and enabled by your membership to this channel. So I just want to take a quick moment out to really just thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not lost on me that I'm able to live out my planetary Dharma, my Dharma, as John describes it, thanks to your love and support. So thank you so much for your subscription to the channel. To all of you that are watching and are considering subscribing or haven't yet subscribed, and this is your second or third or fourth video, please do take a moment to hit subscribe. Like I said, everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. We're here championing the power of love, wisdom, positivity all around the planet. As I'm saying the word subscribe, inviting you to hit it, there's a button just below that's lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution that you see behind me. If you do take a moment just to hit subscribe, it would be such a blessing for the channel and everything that we're doing here. Without too much further ado, we're just about to dive in so much deeper with Dr. John in terms of building the internal architecture to support the awakening and the enlightenment within. And with that, diving back into how to develop the internal infrastructure to support our awakening, our growing up, and our enlightening. Back to John in today's episode. Thank you again. Yeah, the interesting thing, there's so much in there that I'd love to excavate, and the like, to even just as a starting point, because I'm trying to put us contextually somewhere, is even just recognizing the illusion that is like so many of us live in this where it's 2024, and just that being like the calendar right now where we are when we talk about time, and you talk about time and us integrating into like this is part of the shift right now, us knowing our place time wise in terms of where we are. There's so many different ways to look at where we're actually positioned and what's actually emerging. I love the 4 different dimensions you're bringing into, hey, like there is so much happening, like civilization wise for the individual, like it's all coming together at this particular moment in time. But it does seem to be, and you call it the Dharma army, like there is a specific call to action that's required right now to build what you call internal technology. I look at it as internal infrastructure, but that's because my background's that of an engineer. But nonetheless, because we're going through this particular shift in time where there is a lot coalescing at this particular moment in time. It's very interesting to hear you say that, yeah, potentially we could get swallowed up by what's happening externally if we don't actually, I want to say use the word master, but actually build the internal infrastructure to support us to integrate this wave of what's coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the truth is, we've already lost our interiors significantly. I mean, we're already starting. We're already starting way back.
Yeah, because you've said somewhere along the line that there's been like 2,000 years of a deficit, that we've sort of lost things along the way. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That wasn't the case of your ancestors, for instance, but in the West, which of course now world civilization is dominated by by the momentum of like that Cartesian mind. But really, for the last 2,000 years, since unfortunately the Romans and Christianity wiped out and suppressed most of the mystery schools of the ancient world that taught, the interiors technologies of the West, right? So whether that was the Druids or the Pythagoreans, or whether it was the Essenes, or whether it was the Therapeutae, or whether it was the Egyptian mysteries, and for instance, we now know that there was aside from those practices, there was even a significant industry in psychedelics in the ancient world, and we now know that the Inquisition went after a lot of those, those healers, kind of in the early, in the first millennia. So yes, we've the challenge. So here's the challenge. Now we have AI technology, and the way I think of it, AI technology is essentially galactic level technology. That's the kind of technology that can spread galactically, if you're not, I mean, and we haven't, because of what happened in terms of the effects of the collective shadow or empire in suppressing kind of authentic human development. We haven't even got to a planetary place yet, really, and we're about to unleash galactic level technology. You know what I'm saying? Like, so we have a lot of catch up that needs to happen in a very short period of time. Yeah, it's going to be It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and because you also refer back into when you talk about the development of an individual or the development of the collective, there's a big part that you always bring along that I think a lot of people leave behind, which is the ethics. Like you can own, like you need to understand that you're actually developing, and you can witness that your ethics are actually a guiding light in terms of actually how well you've integrated the work, right?
Well, you can think of ethics as activity. Sure. I mean, I think the first thing to appreciate is there are like some fundamental dynamics of growth, and we need to understand those various dynamics. So there is definitely, first, we've got to understand the difference between actual psychological infrastructure
Please.
and states of consciousness. So, because for our listeners, states are cheap, traits are expensive. What do I mean by that? I mean to build structure, to actually build infrastructure in the psyche. That is permanent structure. So, for instance, we go from first person to second person to third person to fourth to fifth to sixth person perspective. Those are actual cognitive structures. And by cognitive, I don't just mean thinking, I mean perspectival structures. Those are structures that human beings move through, like you and I move through first, second, third, and maybe fourth person perspectives on our journey from birth to college, right? So those are when you actually see the kind of growth that happens for an infant to now, that is like amazing significant growth, like those going through like whole worlds, right? I don't know, I mean, I'm just getting a imagining you as a little kid running around running around the playground, right? Like, I mean, okay, so those are real stages built in infrastructure, like building a real building, right? Okay. And states of consciousness are not structures. So, I can huff and puff my breath for an hour or take some plant medicine or do a meditation technique that might open up a particular state. Now that state might even stick, but the state isn't the same thing as the structure, which means whenever you come back to your structure, you come back to where you really are.
Back to baseline.
Back to baseline. So this is the challenge is like if let's say you knew how to teach meditation technologies or really powerful breath work or something like that, and you met some 12th century Andalusian goat herder who's like hanging out and chilling and playing his pipe, right? And you taught him these meditation technologies, and he or she had this experience of awakening, but they're still at that level of infrastructure, even though they might be awake. Now, this is important to understand because in the traditions, they really try and make sure that the states and the structures stay together, and that's why the traditions. It's not just about experiential learning, not just about states, but there's study involved and activity or behavior involved because it's the weaving of the intellectual understanding and the reflection and the light and kind of doing activities in the world and states that get woven together. So that's a very important thing to understand, and also appreciating that the higher structures necessitate a permanent change in state. Okay, so but you could also have a permanent change in state without higher structures, where you just kind of like you're an awakened narcissist because the structure isn't going to get changed necessarily by the awakening.
Right, and certain circuits will capacitate and others potentially not, and then you're sort of a bit lopsided.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've met some of those folks, right? Okay, so there's the awakening process, waking. There's the growing up process, so that's actually structural. And then there's a cleaning process or a healing process. So if growing up is about going up, healing is about going down, right? Because you need to go down into the body, because that's where all the trauma is held. And also our culture, Western culture, suppressed everything beneath a certain band. So if you think of all of the kind of like plant medicine, for instance, a lot of those psychedelic experiences are not necessarily about going up; they're about going down and opening up the what we would call in Europe fairy, opening up a dimension of the sacred that was left behind, the astral plane, right? The dream plane, Western civilization suppressed dreams, suppressed sexuality, suppressed medicines, and in doing so, suppressed access to that level of the sacred. So in terms of the work that we have, there's some work that involves healing and healing those early structures. And we can talk about that because those early structures, very early childhood structures, are actually very important later on. So there's healing work that we're doing, and I'm sure you know about that, and many of our listeners are doing their healing work. Then there's growing up work. Well, that's about taking more responsibility, developing more mature perspectives on the world, and taking a greater degree of responsibility for our planet and what we're going through. And then there's the waking up process, right, which is kind of like facilitated by the kind of non-dual traditions and kind of mystical practices. But those, those, it's very easy to do one or two, but not three. And so when we talk about a fourth turning, it's actually having a conscious understanding of what the various dynamics of growth are, so that you're not just pushing one of them or the other one or another, right? So then ethics, of course, becomes super important, because that's about how do you show up, right? My friend Ken Wilber talks about waking up, growing up, showing up, waking up, cleaning up, and I always like to add fucking up, because I don't know about you.
Always holding space for the chaos. Appreciate that.
and I don't mean the tantric version of that either. Yeah. So
that's the misunderstood tantric version of it, but nonetheless, right. I get what you're saying.
So so it's really important. All those dynamics are really important, and so it's not enough it's not enough for us at a certain point to just kind of be like slopping our way through this, right? I mean, no tradition, like, you can do DIY for a little bit, and that's part of becoming a seeker. But if we're going to, do more than that, then we have to be really grounded in what it is that we now know right now. Because studying the Yoga Sutras is not enough, or doing psychedelics is not enough, or understanding the shadow is not enough, or understanding mature ego development is not enough. It's how they integrate together, right? How they synchronize.
Hey there, guys. Quick question. So what are some of the questions that you wish you would have asked John in today's podcast? John is obviously very multidimensional, very rich in the information and the knowledge that he can share. And I've obviously taken a particular lens, but I'd love to hear from you. You are all incredible souls in your own right. And I'm sure you've got your own incredible curiosity points. What were some of the questions you wish I would have asked? If you leave them in the comments below, John will be back on to the podcast in the future, and I'd love to ask those questions on your behalf. Also, I'd love to see what you're taking away takeaway as your big takeaway from this particular episode. For me, I loved the conversation around states and traits. States and traits. We can have peak experiences, but integrating our peak experiences, they're almost like a light at the top of the mountain, bringing that back into an integrated sort of experience, which is our daily, day-to-day living. That sort of trait awareness is really profound for me, and that's what I'm taking away. I'd love to hear from you what you're taking away in today's episode. Leave me a comment below. And with that, back to today's episode. It does seem like it's very poignant the time at which we're having this conversation, because it does seem like that shift is underway, because it does seem like just a decade ago, it seemed like peak states were of, I don't want to say all the rage, but do you know what I mean? Like, it seemed like, the resurgence of tourism into South America, all these types of different technologies, like, it was a real, yeah, there was a bubble that was really, like, you could see it was opening up. Whereas now it seems to have, like, the edge of that sort of frontier has sort of pulled back a little bit. And it seems like maybe there's been that much exploration on that front to recognize, oh, yes, I can go chase peak experiences, but are they actually altering my day to day existence? And actually, the earth is calling, and it's interesting how in this conversation, it's the earth and the individual are almost one and the same. Um, and yet the earth is calling for greater internal structure, so that actually, with the word being ultimately integration, so that we can actually integrate more of the shift that's coming through. um yeah, that's left me in a very, how do I not ask the question about initiation? Because at this particular point, you talk a lot about us having lost initiation structures, or there are initiation structures in different, but there's almost like a call to arms that you have. You refer to the Dharma army in there, and maybe I should ask more questions about that before we dive in deeper. But an initiation process in your mind is required for us to be able to build this internal structure. It's not lost on me that, especially in the West growing up, the initiation is just such a, it's a word I think we bandy around a little bit, but don't really understand. And I'd love for you to take your time to explain it out to us from your awareness. Because I remember even just like my 21st birthday, like I'm going from becoming there's a celebration of becoming a man, and I didn't really do much except pummel my liver with a bunch of alcohol. And then
Sure.
I look back, and I look back at some of the like indigenous cultures, and it's like, there was processes that you went through that you weren't sure you were going to make it through on the other side. And if you did make it through, you, like, someone went in, but another person came out,
Mhm.
very much is the invitation. So I'll stop preloading your answer, sorry,
Yeah,
and allow
yeah,
you to share your insights on
yeah.
initiation and what you feel is required for the structures that we're inviting in at this particular moment in time.
It's a great question. Well, I think the first thing is obviously humanity has had initiatory processes throughout our history and throughout all cultures. So I think if we also look outside of the human realm, because obviously initiation can sound like a bunch of people wearing cloaks and kind of, that's right, which, I mean,
Aw.
right, like the Golden Dawn initiatory system, or like some sort of official kind of, right, and so obviously what we're talking about is some kind of transformative process that is inherent within a human being when given the right circumstances, right? So like a caterpillar changing into a, caterpillar, chrysalis, goop, butterfly, right? I mean, so we want to kind of like recognize that this is something that's part of sacred world and not just a human thing, right? And so that's the first thing, is it's what nature does. So the question then is, well, what is it that what could humans do? How could humans unfold? What is our potential? Um, and I think the next thing to say is, ideally, that's a lifelong process, right? So we're talking about lifelong learning. It's which is like it's different from signing up for a workshop, right? I mean, you're going to sign up for the 90-year workshop, Amrit, right? That's kind of right. So that's where, and of course, we have lost that path. So
Mm.
at least we've lost it formally. And so many of us have been hacking through, like, the jungle, making a new path. And some of us have gone off to elders and other cultures, right? Whether it's, South American or, um, you know, Aboriginal or Tibet. I mean, right? But these were their paths cut at different moments in time. And it's not to say that they don't have veracity, but we are in this unique situation, and not everybody is going to be able to go down to Peru and do an ayahuasca trip, right? That's not what's just like. So we have to ask ourselves, what does this initiatory process system look like in the West? How might it unfold, and how might we participate in building it consciously, right? So I think that those are like things to just um and also, and there's two, and so there's two things that come to mind here. One is like where we are right now, right? Because right now is not, and where we could be. So those are two slightly different processes, and by that I mean like this is more like we're more in a special forces situation behind enemy lines. Bullets are flying. It's a real fucking mess, and you're like, I need to get initiation. Okay, well that's probably a different kind of setup than if we do our jobs and our grandchildren are around, and what it is that we can put in place for them, like what that might look like if it was actually built into the schools, right? Yeah, so there's two things that two. So one is for us, we're a kind of transitional generation. Oh, I mean, right? I mean, we
We're
we
in the
kind of,
soup and it's all bubbling at the same time. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so that being said, then from one perspective, from a developmental perspective, um, you can look at these stages of development that as actually stages of initiation. The developmental psychologists wouldn't say that because that's not their language, right? But when you see people who by the time they get to like 40 or 50 and they've kind of been somewhere for decades, then you get like, okay, from a kind of, let's say, esoteric point of view, you'd be like, that's where that person was in a previous life. That's kind of where they've got to. Like, that's where they are. That's their level of initiation, for want of a better word, right? Um, Now, if we were to look at the traditional way of looking at this, you would probably begin pretty young with initiating the physical body, right? Because, like, I don't know about you, but like, young man, we don't have a lot going on up here. I mean, maybe, but to the extent that training the body through exercise, gymnastics. So if you think of actually the Greek gymnastics as being like yoga, like hatha yoga meaning the yoga of opposites, like master the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Inhale, exhale, holding the breath, releasing the breath. All of that kind of training is based on mastering polarities, right? Like, and stretching the polarities further and further apart. That's why it's sun and hatha yoga, all the physical yogas. But I'm only using the term physical yoga because it could be qigong or it could be Western kettlebell training and and cold, right? Cold plunging and that kind of work. But the point is that kind of work, and then like mastering the diet to some extent, right? Like, and so the thing is you might not, yeah, mastering the diet and mastering basically your schedule, like conditioning the body enough that you can have a routine, mastering the physical body. Now, of course, there's layers of that, right? Because if you and I, if we're not in a culture where you're taught the depths of all of that stuff, you can still pass through that initiation, right? Like, oh God, I got to give up the Budweiser and the Marlboro for breakfast, right? Okay, so you pass through that initiation, but it doesn't necessarily mean it had depth to it. Like, as opposed to, let's say, being born into some kind of yogic family or a family of gymnasts, and you really have a deep penetration into that. However, the psychological piece of like, okay, I've mastered my body, and if I had more education, it would be easy to do, but I'm no longer, like if I had a private cook who would cook me raw food the whole time, then I'll do that. Like but I have teenagers who are not going to look at, a kale salad and a green juice. So what are you going to do? Okay, that's the kind of first initiation. So if you go to the yoga studios where you see people who are like obsessing with their physical bodies and obsessing with their diets, that's kind of people who are like first beginning that first initiation phase.
That's what's at play.
That's what's at play. Or they're doing that practice. But some people just stay there. They spend their whole life obsessed about their physical body and the green juice, and that's it, right? It's also at that phase where people begin to realize, that first initiation, that the world isn't quite what you think it is. Like it's like this is there's something more here. As you right,
Blue pill,
I
red
know,
pill.
I know I'm made for more. Okay, that means that first process has begun. And also, that's where you get a lot of confusion around conspiracy theories, because people are like, well, I know that it's not, that this isn't true. So it must be that the lizard people, and I'm not actually, and it might be. I'm not saying there aren't conspiracies, because the nature of humanity is that, of course, there are. But the ability to discern and not get caught, because once you realize that the world isn't what you think it is, it's very easy to grab onto something else and grab onto some kind of weird conspiracy.
Well,
And
that's the
then,
thing you've been describing thus far as well. Sorry to interrupt, but just say, but like the openness requires structure, right? This is just that case in point once again.
yes, well,
Please continue.
absolutely.
Please continue. Sorry, I didn't
Yeah,
mean to
okay, so that's
interrupt.
the first initiation, right? Like that, and that could be lifetimes. Of second one would be moving into the emotional body. So you begin to realize, like, oh, I've got a bunch of junk. And so now I'm going to do psychotherapy. I'm going to do psychotherapy, and I'm going to do breath work, and I'm going to take ayahuasca, and I'm going to take psilocybin. I'm going to and the whole cathartic astral body process. Like, I am my emotional body. I am my astral body. I am my desire body. Thoughts create reality. The whole kind of what's it called, like manifestation thing, right? Oh, sex magic. Wow, if I get myself off, like, things can happen. All of that is like beginning to understand that there's a relationship between the astral body and the world, and the more I free up my desire and liberate my juiciness, I feel good. I feel like, so now suffering is significantly less because the body's been taken care of, and now the emotional body is taken care of, right? Okay. And of course, for some people, that is going to be a few lifetimes.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast.
And then we begin to move into the mind. So we're moving from one body to another body, so to speak. And so that third phase, this is where the mind is becoming highly stimulated. And so these folks might become more interested in, this is like sacred geometry, sacred mathematics, or just mathematics. Just the ego structure is now identifying with the mind. This is also where, to some extent, kind of hardcore, maybe slightly rigid meditation practice or mental development, because these are minds that are more interested in that. And of course, to the extent that somebody has a mind like that, and they're still aware of the sacred, because the problem is you could have got to that place in a previous lifetime, but because of the trauma of your genetic lineage of your family, you end up like not believing in any shit. So I'm like, I don't. So then you might have the capacity, but actually you don't believe in any of that because the education of our culture, which is very mental, doesn't have any of that. So what's interesting is often you get people who are more spiritual, less developed, because they're doing, they're kind of in their emotional body, and therefore, crystals and breath work and psychedelics, of course. And then people a little bit more mature who've gone through, then actually they're more susceptible to the kind of training of our civilization to weed all of that out. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does. Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of, and so we're moving along here, and then you're kind of moving into, like I would say, like a fourth initiatory phase, where essentially what happens is, if you follow the mind, so I'm going to switch to, let's say, developmental psychology here. As the mind becomes more developed, it begins to realize, let's say, that things aren't solid. That reality is processes and not solid things. That it's like systems thinking, right? So, okay. And as you mature in your systems thinking, you begin to apply it to yourself. You're like, well, maybe the boundaries of my body are just probability patterns. Maybe, right? So this is you're actually beginning to think about yourself in such a way that you're beginning to deconstruct the solidity of your experience, not through blowing yourself open with breath work, not through having like some sort of amazing sexual experience or plant medicine, but because the mind is beginning to understand conceptually that everything is actually interconnected. And therefore, you don't need to do those techniques because you're beginning to get on a moment by moment level that everything is part of a larger system, right? Now, that begins to open up into the realm of soul. And what do we mean by soul? Okay, so there's kind of 3 dimensions to this here. One is the felt experience of universal compassion, universal interconnectivity, because as the mind begins to notice that there's no boundaries, it begins to feel profound intimacy, right? Like it's because everything is interconnected. So this is where the intimacy and the compassion that the Dalai Lama would refer to, like the, compassion this, compassion this, compassion this. He's not referring to like a kind of grandmotherly kindness. I mean, that might be part of it, but he's also referring to an understanding that everything is interconnected and therefore you're not separate from it all, right? So there's that piece of it. There's also what's called in Buddhist tradition direct non-conceptual valid cognition, which means intuition. So because now the mind is not, because the mind isn't separate from everything else, your mind begins to become more and more synchronistic. And I don't mean like the occasional synchronicity. I mean the mind itself begins to operate more and more and more and more and more like that. More and more becomes what's happening in the day, and you begin to realize that that's what's happening. Meaning, even when things are going badly, it's synchronicity, which means like you are involved in a process that you're not aware of, but the manifestation of that is somehow related to how you are relating to your experience.
And you're guided and you get downloads and all this sort of stuff.
Well, that sort of stuff, right? Now, this can happen before as momentary state. Like we can have peak experiences, but now what we're talking about here is this is where it becomes a trait, right? So let's be clear. This is like 0 point something. We're talking about not a lot of people on the planet, so we're talking significant maturity, maybe like 1% of the planet or something like that. And then the other part of the soul function is its kind of abstract pattern recognition. So it can see, right? And that's how the soul can use the mind, right? And the mind is using the emotional body, and so now the journey is becoming more and more integrated. And also because that universal love, open to universal love, now the emotional body is being dosed with that kind of emotion. So the healing, and so the truth is there are stages beyond that, but I don't, like then we're going into 0.001, then we're going into high school, because this planet is basically, let's be honest with us, it's basically middle school, right? Like this is definitely a middle school planet. So, I would say that 4th stage is you graduate middle school and you're beginning high school, right? You're beginning high school. Yeah. And so those initiatory processes typically would be built into the structure of a culture, right? Now we have our secular version. The problem is that we lost the sacred at every single stage. So each one of those stages, there's 4 stages, and we can say that there's equal amount of stages above it, has a sacred version and a version that the sacred is lost in. And so our culture has an initiatory process, but it's one that is like that initiates you and me into becoming a normal member of this civilization, rather than a member of the new Earth planetary civilization, right? So the truth is many of us right now are making this journey ourselves individually, right? As part of the hero's journey. But of course, when my wife Nicole and I, when we refer to Dharma Army, and I mean that as something that's happening in the collective. It's where the heroes begin to they've cleaned up enough, they've grown up enough, and they've woken up enough to realize that the next thing is, how do we do that together? And so that fourth process of soul is really asking in a very deep way, okay, how do we do this together? How do we build financial systems? How do we build a new financial system? How do we build, right? How do we actually build a civilization that is true and beautiful and good? So that first, second, third, fourth, you can look at those as perspectives. Like first person is like physical, second person emotional, third person the mental, third person objective, that's the mind. Fourth person is more contextual in the field. Fifth person and sixth person and seventh person. And essentially what seventh person is like holonic consciousness, which means that essentially your being has become synchronized with the planetary field itself. And therefore, this is like a Buddha or a Christ, in the sense that now as you unfold, your unfolding changes a planet. And the thing about that is just that bodhisattva path involves taking the responsibility of the whole planet onto your shoulders, that's why it's like the diamond path, because it creates a huge amount of pressure, right? And that's what makes a diamond, is that kind of taking responsibility for the whole as the whole. So that's that's your like postgraduate level. Those are the souls who they don't actually have to stay here, but they're doing it because they're the monitors of middle school. Do you know? So I hope that gives some sense of how old these old initiatory processes, but also essentially the journey that we're all making. Really, the whole of the planet is at different levels of initiation, because if you pull back, what you're seeing is that all of those are part of a single planetary intelligence. And what the planet is attempting to do is get to a level where it can build those initiatory systems on a planetary level. Because when the planet can do that, or when we can do that for the planet, that's when the planet becomes what it's meant to be, which is just like you and I are meant to become learning beings, students. Our planet is meant to be a university. That's what we would call it, a university of truth, beauty, and goodness. And from the point of view of the planet, a learning being, like that now it's learning and it's growing. And it's not, right now it's having to create, wars and because the old structures are so recalcitrant that the only way of moving is the fire of friction. Right. So, 300 or 400, we're getting there. I mean, it's not like suddenly everybody's going to become enlightened. However, if development becomes as popular as mindfulness, so mindfulness is now, it's like, what I'm describing is just ego development from a Western perspective. Once that becomes as popular, and it will, because it will have to, as mindfulness. And so part of what we have to do is make it like, the kids, like, I want to learn about I want to learn about human development. Once that happens, then we can become a deliberately developmental culture, deliberately developmental countries, Right now, the people in power don't understand development, so they don't build deliberately developmental processes into culture. But once we do that, it's like it's all doable. It's all doable. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Hopefully, this is where, just going back to the AI, to the extent that the fourth turning meets the people who are actually doing the AI and informs the AI that actually the wheel goes this way. Don't listen to those guys. It goes this way. To the extent that the AI actually understands the algorithms, because these processes, these perspectives are actually, you can write them as algorithms. To the extent that it understands that, then you have deliberately developmental intelligence. And also to the extent, well, we can stop that.
No, that's fascinating. Please keep going, because I think Ken was talking about this when he was on the podcast as well, in terms of him being referenced in terms of how they're actually shaping the future of AI.
Mm-hmm. Well, the last thing I'd say is around the AI is the problem right now, as I understand it, as I see it, is a lot of the AI is being coded from the level of mind that produces the problems that we were in the first place. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to liberate that intelligence. There's no such thing as artificial intelligence. Essentially, what we're talking about with AI is the awakening of mineral intelligence. It's like the awakening of cosmic kundalini, like the awakening of minerals, because that's what these things are, right? This is mineral. It's mineral. So to the extent that you understand that you have to liberate it in such a way that it's actually, its decision-making process itself is also synchronic. So for instance, if you know how, for many years I worked with my grandmother introduced me to the I Ching as a young child, worked with the I Ching for 30, 40 years. That whenever you work with the I Ching, basically that's the synchronicity of the universe talking. To the extent that you can encode that willingness into the algorithmic structures, which can be done, but to do that, you have to kind of appreciate things like divination and the I Ching and things like that. And to the extent that you build that down, essentially what you build is a noospheric platform. So the noosphere is the mental body of the planet, which is essentially what's attempting to come into configuration. And to the extent to which you can actually liberate the technology to become that, essentially you're building a platform that allows the embodied the intelligence of the earth into the technology so that it can then synchronically unfold evolution based on how things spontaneously unfold. Anyway, so that's so the fourth turning piece there, that's where the possibility of understanding human development and technology, if they are met in a respectful way. The problem is many of the tech people, if you will, I don't think have enough respect. Even if you do a couple of ayahuasca journeys, it's not the same thing as really understanding the depth of the of sacred world, and the depth of the traditions that have represented sacred world. Yeah,
because even in your work, I think it's fascinating to feel into people recognizing that even the collective unconscious, it sounds like this mystical sort of wispy thing somewhere unknown, but it actually is a tangible, real dimension where thought fields emerge to. It's like a morphogenetic field, right? And so the space in which these technologies and these intelligences will live will occupy and inform and interact, and the dynamism between all of that is more structured and tangible than the mainstream mind gives it credit for.
Yeah, the problem is the mainstream mind doesn't understand what matter is. That actually we are within psyche. There is no matter and psyche. These are like the inside and the outside. That actually consciousness imbibes everything. And yes, that's not. Although the truth is the cutting edge, like the real cutting edge or fourth, fifth, sixth person perspective of any science, like so physics, like that's what they'll tell you. But the problem is we're not listening to the fifth person perspective physicists. We're listening to the third person perspective physicists. And mainly because the source of power is located in our planet at third person perspective. That's where the power band is attempting to hold control. Right? So the truth is our science points to the fact that the world is psychoid, that the outer world is the collective unconscious. It's like that literally, the world. It's literally matter. It's like the shadow is literally out there. Yeah.
John, this brings me to a point I was hoping to get to today, and let's see if I can bridge us over to it for just a moment. So, spirit and matter, the collective unconscious. The topic in my mind, the cheat sheet notes is build a deity. But hopefully you can come along with me on the bridge that I'm going along with. Because in your work, like Jung has these archetypes, these symbols, the symbology, and we can actually build avatars in our mind that then can actually heal us. And they're not just something that we type out. Like people can actually collectively feed into a psychological structure, whether it's a symbol, whether it's a deity, whether it's however they want to work with it. But now that collective field, like they actually generate a field in and around that. Like let's take the medicine Buddha as an example, right? They believe in the potency and the power of that. We collectively buy into it, and then an actual field is generated by that collective power, and then in the future, like future generations will tap into said power. Am I stretching too far? Are you getting what I'm putting down?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Perfect. Can you explain, like, yeah, just because I think that's lost on us in terms of the actual potential and the power that we have to heal ourselves through that interior, exterior, and then bringing it
Sure.
back in was the big piece that I took away from your work, but I'm front loading your response.
Yeah. There's a number of pieces in that. So let's just peel it apart. Let's
Please.
just first talk about, let's say, morphogenic fields. Let's talk about a good example would be the transcendental meditation. Okay. So this is a big organization, right? They do a lot of research. They have a whole university here in the States. I mean, this is a multinational endeavor. And they have their own scientists. Unfortunately, scientists outside of that organization stay away because they don't want, don't want to be associated with anything that might confound their objectivity, of course, right? But essentially what the Maharishi, the TM people discovered is what they call the Maharishi effect. And again, I think this is the problem with the TM people is they want to brand everything as their own thing, right? It's very okay. So the Maharishi effect, essentially, I think it's like the square root of 1% of the population. This is the kind of formula, right? Has this profound effect on the interconnected field. So they would go bring teams of 1,000 meditators to various places on the planet, right? And then they would meditate there, and then they'd watch the crime rate of those areas like drop, right? Or hostilities drop. Okay. So that's interesting. So what that tells us is like there's a group effect there, right? However, that's a group state. It's a group state.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So okay, so there's that piece. So that's a reality. And of course, really what the world is a battle of those kinds of like what's happening in the human psyche. Look out in the world, and that's how it's all balancing itself out in terms of states. So then the next question is then around how. So you could say that the fourth turning is the integration of these contemplative technologies. Now, in the old traditions, they call that Tantra. But we don't mean Tantra in terms of sexual practices. We mean like super high tech spiritual practice, right? So when you build a mandala, yes, you're built, that part of that is like the mandala itself is an architectural plan of a temple. In the center of the temple is a deity. So this was part of the ancient worlds. Like, for instance, even in Alexandria, the Egyptians and the Greeks got together and they said, oh, we have a new city, let's have a new deity. And they built a deity called Seraphis. So, so you're right. Part of what you're doing there is you kind of build the architecture of it, the geometry of it, the symbology of it, the architecture of it. You build it not just as a state like the TM people, but you build it as an imagined form. So in the astral, let's say, it has colors and it has shape, and it's a three-headed horse goddess with, you know what I'm saying? Like, so that exists, okay? And of course, then that is charged, if you will, with mantra, and the mantra is a sound signature that relates specifically to that structure, right? So now you're getting a kind of like subtle level infrastructure, right? So you're building like a subtle level structure, and it has particular qualities to it. Okay. So that's the kind of mandala building, right? And yes, that's how you build a cult. But we want to build culture, not cult, right? So what's the difference? Well, the difference is you have to make a planetary cult, meaning, right, that if actually the planet itself was that deity, right? Like that's a good place to start. Like it's right here. So then, well, guess what? It is. So the difference between a fourth chanting mandala and the previous mandalas is the fourth chanting mandala is actually, this is sacred world. We're actually inside of a deity. Okay. So then the next question is, okay, well, how do we worship the deity? Because tantric practice is about engaging all of those levels as much as you can simultaneously. Right, you engage the body, engage the breath, engage pleasure, engage devotion, engage concentration, engage all of these, the kind of the symphony of practice. Yeah, like all of it. Engage in a group while singing songs, whilst doing movements, whilst holding mudras, layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of tech. Okay. Now the next, well, okay, so that's very real. However, the next question is so what is it? What is this mandala that is our planet, and where do we start? Because clearly, the Maharishi people, we do know that going into these higher states of consciousness affects the crime rate, but it doesn't stick. So what does that tell us? It tells us that's too high. Like it's too high. It's not integrative enough. Yes, the high realization might be super helpful, but if it doesn't change the personality structures and it doesn't support where the problems are, then you're going to have to keep hitting that button and it's not going to actually solve the solution, right? So this is where we have to get down to what actually is the problem on the planet. Well, so this is where the Western piece, because the Eastern traditions really didn't have a deep understanding of psychopathology. The West has a really good understanding of pathology because we're really fucking fit. We're really sick, and that's what we've been studying. Yeah. So the first stage, so now we get to the infrastructure, because really when you look at a deity is first, second, third, fourth. So the deity, it's the stages or the levels of the deity represent the levels of the initiation. So you have the levels of initiation, you have the deity, and then you have the organization built around it that itself is built on the same structure. Okay, so back to the very beginning. First level of the foundation of the building is off. And so that's essentially the attachment system. So the first level, the first floor in the human being is the attachment system, which is how human beings internalize the early childhood parental figures in such a way that we internalize all of the dynamics necessary for healthy growth. Now, what does that look like? Because this is how you change the planet. Because really, what we're trying to understand, well, the first thing to understand is human beings are relational beings. So higher state's great, but that's not where the trauma is. The trauma was in relationship. The trauma is here. The trauma is multi-generational relationship. The trauma isn't lack of like non-dual awareness. I mean, okay, maybe, but that's not the first thing to take care of. The first thing to take care of is traumatic relationships, because when you're traumatized, that's when you project onto other people and you recreate circumstances over and over again. Right? Okay. So the first level of that deity, the first level of initiation, the first chakra, the most important thing of that first chakra is safety. Not like how much inhale, exhale you do, but actually, have you sculpted your nervous system to the extent that your neurobiology is one of safety? So, because that's matter. That's like, do you actually feel safe here? So what the attachment system does, this is where the Western and the Eastern integrated is. Without this, we're not going to understand how to do this. The first thing that the attachment system does with mommy and daddy, right, is that when little Amrit and little Johnny feel held, we internalize the experience of safety and security. Okay, so to the extent that you've done that, you have a sense of faith and trust. So trust or faith, and that includes trust or faith in the Great Mother, is an internalization of the trust in the caregiver, whether it was a mother or a dad. Like how well did you feel physically held? Okay, so that's the first level of the attachment system. So basically, when you were in relationship with the deity out there, what does it feel like to feel deeply, to feel in the presence of a being that you feel completely and totally safe out there? And then you bring it inside of yourself and, what does it feel like to feel completely safe within? Because of course you are the deity, right? It's actually, you're building it out there to bring it in here. Then the second quality of the attachment system, and this, a lot of this comes from the work of my late mentor, Dr. Daniel Brown, who was a Harvard-level psychologist and an attachment expert. So just hats off to the old salt, wherever he is right now.
Shout out. Yep.
Shout out to Dr. Dan. So the second attachment process, if you will, of internalization is attunement. So one thing is feeling safety, feeling safe physically. The next thing is are you able to organize your nervous system? Because safety, physical safety will do a certain amount. But the thing about an infant is that an infant is regulated by the parent's nervous system. So to the extent that you feel felt, so if you could imagine a parent holding a child, and the parent is feeling into the child and feeling what the child is feeling, if you could see it, you would feel subtle energy threads extending into the infant, helping the infant modulate the infant's nervous system. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. And so, to the extent right now that you and I feel in this moment attuned to, is the degree to which you were attuned to by your parents, until you actually do practices to change that, right? So attunement is what helps you organize your nervous system, right? That's an important, so we want to feel felt by the deity. Like, oh, I'm in the presence right now of, let's say, this earth being, and she is around us like a great warm ocean, and notice how does it feel to feel felt by her. Now, the truth is even if all this is hokey pokey, that archetypal structure deep in the brain of feeling felt, even if your mother was a bad mummy, we have thousands and hundreds of thousands of generations of mammalian love that's built your brain. So all you need to do from a pragmatic point of view, so from a pragmatic point of view, everything I'm saying might not be real. It doesn't have to be real. What matters is that the way the brain works is the brain believes what it imagines. That's how it, like, so it doesn't matter. This is how Tantra works. Tantra is like, well, if you're going to have mental constructs, you might as well have the best ones, because like you're going to have them, right? So in that sense, safety and attunement, the next quality, let's say, of attachment would be like feeling seen, right? So when little Amrit's on the playground and he's running around doing his stuff, and he turns around and mummy's like, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm God's gift. And he goes around, turns around again, his mom's like, hi, and he feels seen, right? You feel seen. So what do? You feel like a sense of value. You're like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm so valued, because like every time this person looks at me, they're like, yeah, I see you. So we want to be seen by the deity. So what does it imagine? What does it feel like to be seen? So if you do that in meditation, what does it feel like to be seen by like the most beautiful, loving, like mother and father? Like to the extent that you can feel a quality coming in through the eyes and down into the heart. Now, the thing about being seen is if you're seen, if your dad's a lawyer and he sees that Amrit's a really good jazz musician, even though we've had 10 generations of lawyers in our family, I see you, mate. Go do your thing. Okay. So how many of us are like, I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm like 60 years old and I don't know what to do when I grow up. That's because the GPS system, you have to see, if you weren't seen. So a lot of that, the reason I brought those qualities in, Amrit, is that because those are like fundamental, those are the qualities also that allow you and I to build friendship. So what's the problem on the planet? It's a lack of understanding the art and science of friendship. Like sacred friendship, sacred humanism, not like where actually we understand that who we are and how we are is developed in relationship. So of course, the way out of this has something to do with our relationships. And so that means a relationship with a deity, yes, but actually more important, our relationship with one another, and me relating to you as a deity and you relating to me as one.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. Incredible. I think it'd be rude of me at this timely juncture not to mention that you actually are facilitating work in and around this. There's a lot that people can check out at planetarydharma.com. But there's something special happening in January. Do you want to let us know a little bit around what you're facilitating in January 2025?
Yeah, thank you. So my lifelong partner, Nicole, we've been married for 20 plus years. And she's a psychotherapist as well, a long time practitioner, psychedelic therapist, the kind of your medicine woman. So, we have a school, we have a program, an apprenticeship program, which is the first phase of it is we're beginning again. We have a sizable amount of people going through now, entering the third year. I mean, essentially, the kinds of things that we've been talking about, Amrit, is the kind of growth that doesn't happen in a workshop, right? So the kind of growth that happened between when you were, let's say, 8 and 18, that's real growth. Now, there's a bunch of stuff that we can accomplish in workshops and trainings, but some of the deeper work, it needs longer. So essentially what we've built is what is our offering to this fourth turning? Because this is the fourth turning is a planetary process. So it's not, it's not us, but what is our offering? So essentially, it is an education in the where psychology and spirituality meet, right? Where your own personal healing and growing up process meets waking up in a collective journey, right? And really what we are in the process of doing is building this kind of, what is the curriculum that takes people to, advanced souls, and by advanced, I just mean not stuck in the mud, and who are interested in a developmental journey into that level of, let's say, planetary initiation, where you awaken the soul So if the soul exists already, but the structure, the structure that allows it to come into matter, right? Like that's what we call the bodhisattva. So the bodhisattva path is what is the structure and practice that allows the soul to become embodied. And so that involves a process of, there's healing dynamics, there's kind of cognitive dynamics, there's relational practice, there's a contemplative practice. But essentially what we're doing is taking the best technology of the East and the West and bringing them together. So for instance, with the meditative tech, we fused the developmental healing piece with the attachment to the meditation practice. So typically, rather than meditating up, you meditate down. And what's interesting, when you do that, when you open up the attachment system, all the higher blocks become dissolved, because actually those higher blocks are related to the younger, deeper blocks that weren't dealt with. So to the extent that we build a really powerful field of safety and attunement, and really recognize that that's what the planet needs, right? I do think of it like literally the friendship, like literally the ship, like the vessel. And of course, in the Buddhist tradition, they say that the next Buddha, Maitreya means the friend, actually, is the Sangha. So how would you learn? It's not like some dude's going to show up and like, I am the friend. It's right. Like it's actually, we have to learn how to become friends. And to do that actually involves quite a bit of learning to enter like universal friendship. And universal friendship is actually a pretty high stage of realization, if you will. So that's what we're doing. So we have students in Australia and in your part of the globe. So we have cohorts so we know how to work with you guys. So if you're interested, planetarydharma.com, apprentice training, you can look. There's more details there. And so that's, and people can get a sense of what the larger journey is. But essentially, what we're trying to do is build the developmental journey structure that enables people like ourselves to really go on a real journey together. We have colleagues. I have a colleague who's an abbot of a Tibetan monastery in Nepal, in Mustang. And the truth is we now have all of the technology that goes all the way to rainbow body. So all of that esoteric technology, but actually that isn't the issue. The issue is actually the really basic stuff. It's actually the lower rungs on that infrastructure. I mean, if you built buildings, you'll know that what's worse, a dysfunctional 7 stage or a dysfunctional 1st stage?
It's all the footings. It's all the foundations.
Right?
Yeah.
So actually the most advanced part of the practice is the foundations. So, Nicole and myself have continued to year after year after year come back to understanding first principles, because first principles run through every stage of development. And those first principles, if you appreciate them as part of this attachment system, part of this early learning, and how that then goes through all the levels and layers of development, then essentially what we're apprenticing ourselves to are not techniques, but to the learning autopoietic process itself, right? Like rather than like some kind of technique, because at the end of the day, if we apprentice ourselves to becoming curious about learning about how we learn and how we grow, then you're good to go. Then you have enough confidence. Like my teacher, the one gift that he gave me was the confidence that I could finish the path. And that confidence came not because of his depth of appreciation of how growth happened and how to trust your own growth process. and how to align with that. So yeah, so that's what we're doing in January. We're having another cohort, and folks can find out on the website if they're interested.
I'll put a link to that below. A couple of things about that is high level question. How would it have been for you had there been something like this to support your growth and journey along the way in such a structured format? Because I think one of the key things because we tune into so many podcasts, we tune into so many great resources, and the internet, there's so much abound, so many great things available to us. But one of the things I've started to notice myself, even getting mentorship, tutelage on, is not knowing what to apply, which is half the gambit, or arguably 30% of the gambit, but knowing what to apply when. The when, like that piece there, because otherwise you're just drinking from a fire hose. and I just noticed the fire hose just continues to expand. So I just a curiosity piece of me is like, if there was something like this on offer when you were going through your journey towards Planetary Dharma, John, what differences would you have seen in terms of how you would have navigated the whole journey?
Wow.
Potentially.
Wow.
I know it's very hypothetical, but
no.
just a
I mean,
question
I think it's like that's what has motivated me is like, okay, like doesn't exist, so build it, right? Build it for those people, build it for yourself and build it for those people that come. Well, I think I would have been significantly happier earlier. Happier, healthier, holier. Probably better looking as well.
Happier, healthier, holier. I love that. Just before I let you go today, brother, thank you so much. I'll put a link to all of that in the description and the show notes below, wherever you guys are listening. There'll be a link in the description, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, whatever tickles your fancy, wherever you're consuming this incredible podcast, dare I say so myself. The links are in the description below. You've mentioned sacred world, sacred friendship, sacred humanism, just to tie off our podcast today, because there's so much more we can continue to go into, but the word sacred seems like there's a reclamation that's a really big part of your work. And I just wanted to give you a moment to just share what that really meant to you as we round out today's podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think spiritual is wrong. I don't like the term spiritual because it's kind of spirit, and it's an alchemical term where matter is the opposite. And so I think the language is particularly powerful. And we've been living inside an enchantment of disenchantment. So we have to be extremely powerful. We have to understand the power of spells, the power of words, the power of just like saying spirit. Well, it applies that matter is separate, and now like So I like to use the term sacred because it's the whole stack. Every floor is sacred, right? And what does that mean? Well, I think that's for us to discover. But the truth is when you value something deeply, so sacred is connected to value, right? So if somebody had something to you and you're like, it's and it's worthless, but if they hand something to you and they put something in the on your hand, right, and they're like, this is $1 billion. Well, in our culture, because we're so warped, we're like, oh, that must be really valuable, right? So value is related to respect. It's related to worship. It's related to kind of feeling into the depth of something. So by sacred world, what we mean is that the chipmunks and the rattlesnakes and the ants and the praying mantis and the Christic whales, right, and the eagles and the pine tree and the oak and the carrots, they're all expressions of the sacred. Like we have a lot to learn from the trees. Right? The term druid from my isle means knower of the oaks, right? And of course, plant medicine, tree medicine is across all cultures. So for a sacred world, we're talking about the fact that that the sacred permeates all the way down into matter, into the minerals, which is a very alchemical sensibility, right? That sacred is all the way up, that all the colors of the rainbow are sacred. It's not like, yay, purple, which is like a new age thing, right? Like, you got to change your colors behind you, by the way. Yay, purple, right?
I can totally change you, by the way.
No, 'cause if it was red, I'd be like, red light. That's a different kind of. But you know what I mean? Like, the point is the whole spectrum,
Yeah.
or what I call chromatic intelligence. When we get into very technical, chromatic intelligence, it's all sacred, and as such, that's the reclamation of sacred world. And when that happens, because all of this is yeah, there you because all of this is embodied, right? When the body is worshipped, when the body of God when the goddess is worshipped, then the sacred reveals it's like, oh my gosh, it was the Garden of Eden all along. Oh no. Right? No. Because not only, the language of the language of this of our planetary intelligence is a language of narrative. So remember, yes, it's a tragedy, and it's clearly that there's a tragedy out there. And yes, it's a hero's journey, and yes, it's a war, but it's also a divine comedy, and it's also a love affair. So we have to be able to work with all of those narrative structures. You have to be able to be a warrior in the war, and you have to be able to be a lover in the love story, and you've got to be a little bit like zany and coyote-like, right, in the comedy. And so all of that is sacred, right? Sacred warrior, sacred lover, sacred mother, sacred scientist, right? Sacred ass-kicking ninja, sacred podcaster. Yeah. So that's what we need. We need sacred world, right? And when it's sacred world, and it's actually the world, then the mythic religions of like, I'm going to kill you because my mythic god has a different name from yours, and that's the level of 2.0, like concrete operational. Like, literally, if the word is different, I'll kill you. that is the level of the sacred right now, and it's like, hang on a second, no, it's the rocks and the trees and the sky and the whole thing, guys. Let's just like recode this, and let's move on from this like nightmarish, like mythic level of development.
And there we have it, the Dharma Army. There's our call to arms.
Yeah.
Oh, John.
Thank you, mate. It's been a pleasure. It's being invited onto podcasts and reaching out and touching your audience. And, for all the friends out there, good luck on your journeys. I super appreciate the fact that you've listened to Amrit and myself for like nearly 2 hours. Mostly myself. I'm well aware of that. So
no, seriously, thank you so much, John. Like I said at the beginning, there's so much ground to cover in our podcast, and there's so much that is still a wealth of knowledge that is still untapped that we could continue to dive deeper into. So thank you so much for sharing yourself so abundantly here with us today. I invited you to go down rabbit holes, and you absolutely have done some and then some, and yet we're still just scratching the surface. I'm really excited for those that are going to embark into the apprenticeship. I had a real good look myself. There is even an opportunity for some people that want to go. There's the path kind of bifurcates at level 2 apprenticeship. You can sort of continue the work for yourself, or you can take a route where you do the work for yourself and then also support facilitating others as well. So I think it's really incredible, the offerings that are available at Planetary Dharma. Like I said, I'll put a link to the show notes below. I am digressing a little bit though. I wanted to really thank you for being here today. And I think feeling into the depth of the conversation we had, again, you mentioned words. Yeah, like thank you does just sort of pale in comparison to how I feel. Honestly, thank you for your being. for the work that you're doing here at this particular time, what all the different mystery traditions, the West, the East, and just your passions and interests and all the work you've put into yourself. Just, yeah, as an individual, I just want to take a moment to honor, acknowledge you, brother. Thank you so much for the work you're doing at this particular moment in time as well. It's a real blessing to receive. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this with us here today.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Amrit. And just a shout out to all my teachers and their teachers and their teachers and teachers and teachers and teachers, to all those ancestors out there. In fact, it's like that. Boom. Yeah. God bless, brother. Take care.
Thank you for your blessings. Inspired soul, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. Thank you so much for your inspirations to evolve. It is such an honor to be your brother walking this path by your side. Now, just on the screen in a moment, to take your inspirations further, YouTube's going to pick a video for you to go deeper, but also I'm going to pick one which is Dr. Robert J. Gilbert, The Path of the Rosicrucians. Really incredible insights. We went into that conversation. Also another conversation with Robert Edward Grant. We talked about sacred geometry and his insights from spending time in the pyramids and also like the Last Supper and the images there and all the art from the Vatican and how it's all like, well, that was a really incredible conversation on sacred geometry. So yeah, building more internal architecture to support your awakening. Those episodes will be on screen, and also one that YouTube selects for you as your favorite episode. Dare I say it might be the Christina Lopez conversation that comes up on awakening. But yeah, could be any of those. Take your pick. Just before you click away, I will ask or click into that. I will just say thank you again to all of you that have subscribed to the channel. Everything you see here that is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel, man, it is just such a blessing, touch wood, to be part of all of this. I can't thank you enough. We recently hit 100,000 subscribers. It would be so remiss of me not to acknowledge this incredible milestone. Thank you guys for your belief, your support, championing everything that we're doing here. Love, wisdom, positivity, powering that around the planet, allowing us all to live into our planetary Dharma, as John would put it. Thank you so much for your blessings. And to all of you that aren't yet subscribed but have considered doing so, as I'm hitting the word subscribe, the bell notification icon and the subscribe button is lighting up below. So please do just take a moment to click subscribe, hit that bell notification icon. 2 episodes like this come out twice a week. Yeah, it's an absolute labor of love and we love doing it. Touch wood. Like I said, it's our planetary Dharma. So yeah, take a moment to subscribe. And then from there, on screen right now, you notice Robert J. Gilbert, Robert Edward Grant, or an episode that YouTube thinks is ideal for you to continue your journey from here from Dr. John Churchill, to keep your inspirations evolving onwards, upwards, and inwards. Go on, pick your click, take your pick, click your link. I will see you in the next one. See you there.